In the vast pantheon of Sith Lords who have cast their long shadows across the galaxy, few names stir as much mystery and quiet dread as Darth Plagueis. To many, he remains little more than a story, a parable whispered by Palpatine to seduce Anakin Skywalker toward the darkness. But beneath that tale lies a truth far more unsettling. Plagueis was no mere myth. He was a being of terrifying brilliance, and his story runs far deeper than most dare to imagine. Darth Plagueis was born a Moon One of those tall, gaunt beings often glimpsed in the cold corridors of galactic banking centers. With elongated skulls, hollowed eyes, and thin lips, Moons were not the kind of species one pictured when imagining a Sith Lord. Their power was in credits, not in lightsabers. Yet it was precisely the unexpected that made Plagueis so dangerous from the beginning. His mind was different. Born on the crystalline world of Midi-chlorians, he was surrounded by wealth and transactional logic. While others saw money as a tool for comfort or pleasure, the Moons understood it as pure power. And power, as all Sith instinctively know, is the only currency that matters. But how does a Mooner being bred for banking become a master of darkness, feared by Jedi and Sith alike? The transformation began under the brutal guidance of another Sith master, Darth Tenebris. Sith training was not a curriculum of skills and forms, it was a crucible. It was a slow burn of psychological breakdown, followed by the forging of something new. Pain was the hammer, fear was the chisel, hatred was the fire. The Moon who would become Plagueis endured trials beyond imagining. He did not simply learn the dark side, he embodied it. And more than that, he began to reshape what it could mean. Where other Sith sought only to dominate, to subjugate, to destroy, Plagueis studied. He dissected the Force like a patient scientist peeling back the skin of the cosmos. He didn't just want to use the Force, he wanted to understand it, to grasp its essence, reshape its rules, and bend the very flow of life to his will. It was this scientific obsession that marked him apart from any Sith before him. He became a collector of ancient knowledge, hunting Sith texts, holocrons, and artifacts long buried in forgotten tombs. His sanctum became something between a Sith temple and a laboratory. Scattered across its cold floors and illuminated tables were instruments of experimentation, bottled samples, datapads filled with variables, devices too arcane for any Jedi to decipher. At his side was 11-4D, a protocol droid, but not an ordinary one. It was his assistant, his scribe, and often the only witness to experiments that would chill the blood of even the most hardened Jedi Masters. Wherever Plagueis went, 11-4D followed, recording discoveries that would never grace the pages of science, nor history. This knowledge was not meant to be shared. It was meant to be wielded. Plagueis' fixation above all else became life itself, the origin of it, the mechanics of it, the preservation of it. Like all Sith, he feared death, but unlike his predecessors who turned to ghosts, essence transfers, or ritual possession, Plagueis wanted to remove death entirely, to unmake it. He believed that the key lay in the midi-chlorians, those microscopic life forms that dwell within all living beings, serving as conduits to the Force. While Jedi revered them as sacred bridges between body and spirit, Plagueis viewed them as biological components, genetic keys to eternity. Imagine it, a Sith Lord hunched in silence beneath humming lights, not crafting weapons, not rallying armies, but whispering to cells, trying to coax midi-chlorians to spark life where none had existed. That was Plagueis, at the height of his power, not a warrior, not a ruler, but a god intimating, attempting to rewrite the laws of existence. And what makes this even more astonishing is the time in which he worked. Recent revelations suggest that Plagueis was already active during the High Republic era, a time when the Jedi Order flourished like never before. While they built gleaming outposts and celebrated a golden age of light, Plagueis quietly worked against them from the shadows. This speaks to a patience few beings could fathom. The High Republic began around 300 BBY. Plagueis was planting seeds, then seeds that would not bloom until centuries later. He was the embodiment of the Sith rule of two, the master in the darkness, orchestrating galactic decay across lifetimes. During this time, Plagueis maintained a public identity like many Sith before him, but as a moon, he had a perfect cover. Who would suspect a banking executive of being one of the most powerful dark side practitioners the galaxy had ever known? By 132, Plagueis had taken on an apprentice. This alone was momentous in Sith tradition, but what made it more so was who the apprentice had once been, a Jedi known only as the Stranger or Kia. This being had once walked the halls of the Jedi Temple. That transition from Jedi to Sith is no mere shift. It is an unmaking of identity, a breaking of sacred vows, a self-immolation. That Plagueis could guide a Jedi across that chasm speaks volumes of his understanding, not only of the Force, but of the soul. What kind of training did he offer? It would not have been about raw power alone. It would have been psychological, philosophical reshaping of perception. He would have urged his apprentice to challenge every assumption, to see the Force not as a teacher or deity, but as a tool, to break it, bend it, dissect it. This mentorship wasn't just about creating an alliate, was about proving a point. The Sith did not merely reject the Jedi, they sought to demonstrate that their path was superior. To take a Jedi, unravel them, and build them anew in the image of Sith, this was validation. Yet this was only one piece of Plagueis' grand strategy. Through the High Republic and into the declining days of the Republic, he moved pieces on the galactic board with the subtlety of a master. Banking reforms, trade negotiations, political appointments each served a hidden purpose. While they may have seemed mundane in Plagueis' hands, they were weapons just as deadly as any blade. Picture him at a conference table, nodding politely to economic advisors, while behind those sunken eyes he calculates how this meeting might bring down a senator, derail a planetary alliance, or edge the Republic closer to decay. Jedi looked for threats with crimson blades and cackling madness. They weren't prepared for the Sith in tailored robes, wielding contracts like daggers. That was Plagueis' genius, invisibility, patience, while others made noise and died young. He waited, he whispered. He decayed the Republic from within, quietly, but his legacy doesn't end there. His experiments with midi-chlorians, his attempts to control life and death may have left echoes in the Force itself. Some even speculate that his tampering caused unexpected Force-sensitive births generations later, that his meddling with life's blueprint altered the balance of the Force forever. As we delve deeper into the story of this haunting moon, we will uncover how his manipulations contributed to the fall of the Jedi and the shattering of the Republic. But more than that, we will witness how Plagueis, through his scientific reverence for the dark side, came closer than any Sith before him to the ultimate ambition, to conquer death itself. He was not just another link in the long chain of Sith Lords, he was a revelation, a paradigm shift in how the Sith approached their ancient war. through intellect, patience, and vision. Plagueis left a scar on the galaxy that may never fully heal. Throughout Sith history, the pursuit of immortality has always loomed like a dark star, drawing them closer, devouring them in turn. From ancient lords who preserved their souls in tombs, to those who hopped bodies like parasites, Sith have long tried to cheat the final breath. But Plagueis was different. He rejected rituals, rejected spirits, rejected the mystical. He wanted data. He wanted truth. To him, immortality wasn't a prayer, it was a formula. Imagine again that hidden laboratory, locked away from all eyes. Inside, the tall moon bends over equipment that would bewilder even the most advanced droids. Specimens float in Bacta. Lights blink softly. Everything hums with purpose. Here, Plagueis carried out his most sacred HERESIES, midi-chlorians, those tiny threads binding life to the Force. While the Jedi revered them, Plagueis sought to command them, and to do so, he crossed every ethical line. His test subjects ranged from simple cells to sentient beings. Among them, a Sith Lord named Darth Venomous, once a rival, then a captive. After defeating him, Plagueis did not kill him. He placed him in a coma, and over years, perhaps decades, he resurrected him again and again. Not through illusion or spiritual tricks, but through cellular regeneration, through science. Each revival pushed Venomous closer to oblivion. His organs, his tissues, they deteriorated faster with each rebirth, until even Plagueis could no longer reverse the damage. But in failure, Plagueis learned. Each step revealed more of the mystery. His experiments expanded: domination of will, deep telepathy, healing, regeneration, and above all, life extension. He began manipulating midi-chlorians, learning how to coax them into replication. At first, the process was fatal. Uncontrolled growth ravaged hosts from within. But with time, he refined the technique. With every death came more precision, but his end goal was greater than mere longevity. He wanted to do what nature itself had claimed for its own: to create life. From nothing, consider the magnitude of that desire. To build life not through union, not through bloodlines, but through command. To summon it from silence. To defy the very essence of mortality. That was Darth Plagueis, a being who did not scream into the void, but who whispered, and expected the void to whisper back, but solely through the manipulation of the Force. Plagueis theorized that he could create a zygote through manipulation alone, one that would, in theory, produce a being with an unprecedented midi-chlorian count of 20,000 per cell, a number that would far surpass even the most Force-sensitive beings known to the Jedi, according to the secrets of the Sith text attributed to his eventual apprentice. Darth Plagueis also explored another pathway to immortality, a form known as transference, a dark side Force power that would allow him to transfer his consciousness into another body. Sith of old had attempted this, but Plagueis did not see it as a desperate last resort. He saw it, instead, as another process to be studied, refined, and perfected. Another system of nature that might be made to yield, and as his powers grew, so too did his confidence. Plagueis began to believe he stood on the cusp of true immortality. No Sith before him had come so close to breaking the ultimate limitation of mortal existence. The dark side bent to his will with an obedience and pliability that would have astonished even his own master, and with those achievements came a strange, quiet transformation within Plagueis himself. He had mastered so many aspects of the Force that others thought impossible, so many that his fears narrowed down to just one. Not death. No, not in the way ordinary beings feared it. What he feared was losing the power he had accumulated. It wasn't the simple terror of ceasing to exist. It was something more specific, more refined. Plagueis did not fear oblivion. He feared returning to limitation, the idea of reverting to weakness, to the bondage of mortal fragility. That was what froze the heart of this cold, calculating MUUN, and in this psychological shift lies a hidden truth about the Sith mindset. The pursuit of power is never satisfied. It is never complete. Every peak reached only reveals the next summit. Each new level of mastery only casts light on all that remains unconquered. For Plagueis, who had tasted godlike control over life, itself the thought of returning to anything less became the only thing capable of producing genuine dread. But while his gaze was fixed on midi-chlorians, on test subjects, on cellular immortality and zygotic creation, he may have grown blind. Two more immediate dangers. Across the galaxy, political currents were shifting, and closer to home. His own apprentice was watching, learning, plotting. Plagueis' growing overconfidence in his scientific achievements may have convinced him that he had transcended the vulnerabilities that plagued all living beings. Perhaps he truly believed himself above the cycle of master and apprentice that had defined the Sith for over 1,000 years. Perhaps he saw his research as too vital, too revolutionary, to ever be cut short by something so mundane as betrayal. But that delusion would cost him everything. For all his genius in unraveling the mysteries of life, Plagueis failed to grasp a simpler, crueler truth. Power attracts those who would take it. And often the greatest threat isn't found in the mysteries of the Force, but in the quiet ambitions of those closest to us. The legacy of Plagueis' research would stretch far beyond the limits of his own lifetime. His discoveries about midi-chlorian manipulation, his experiments in life creation, his pursuit of biological immortality, all of it would cast long, slithering shadows over galactic events yet to come. Knowledge that dangerous is rarely lost, especially when an attentive apprentice is watching every movement, cataloguing every breakthrough, and planning how such powers might serve different ambitions. And now, in the story of Darth Plagueis, it is finally time to introduce his infamous apprentice. Every great Sith master eventually selects a apprentice to carry on their knowledge and ambitions. For Darth Plagueis, that choice would alter the course of galactic history in ways even he could not fully foresee. Around 65, Plagueis turned his attention to a young human from Naboo, a man whose connection to the dark side practically radiated for those with the sensitivity to feel it. His name was Sheev, Palpatine, at approximately 19 years of age. Palpatine already possessed raw, untamed talent and a natural affinity for the dark side, an ideal candidate to become the next link in the ancient Sith chain. When Plagueis bestowed upon him the title of Darth Sidious, he was not simply following tradition. He was making a calculated investment in the future of the Sith Order, one that would in time yield dividends beyond even his most audacious expectations. But the relationship between a Sith master and apprentice is unlike anything known to the Jedi. Jedi masters nurture, Sith Lords test. They push, they provoke, they demand growth through conflict, through suffering. And Plagueis was no exception. He subjected Sidious to a training regime so rigorous it would have shattered most beings. But what made their partnership Unique wasn't the brutality, it was the openness, the transparency. Plagueis didn't merely instruct his apprentice in the lightsaber forms or rudimentary force techniques. He shared the full scope of his research theories about midi-chlorians, experiments in life manipulation, breakthroughs in cellular regeneration and death reversal. This kind of openness was unusual among the Sith Masters typically held back. The most crucial knowledge, retaining a final edge in case of rebellion. But not Plagueis. He was different. Together, the two Sith Lords devoted themselves to twin pursuits, unlocking the secrets of immortality, and executing the grand Sith plan to replace the Republic with a reborn Sith Empire. These were not two separate paths. They were intertwined. What value did galactic rule have if that rule was limited by death? And what use was eternal life if spent skulking in shadows? Plagueis instructed Sidious in the ancient philosophy that had guided the Sith for 1,000 years, the rule of two. Established by Darth Bane around 1000 BBY, that doctrine held only to Sith could exist at any one time. A master to embody power, an apprentice to crave it. Plagueis explained how this rule had preserved the Sith, while the Jedi grew arrogant and bloated. But Plagueis' interpretation of the rule had begun to evolve. He saw himself not merely as another inheritor of Bane's vision, but perhaps as its final culmination, perhaps even the perfect being of Sith prophecy in private. He suggested to Sidious that they might one day transcend the very cycle of Sith succession, that they might rule together, side by side, forever once immortality was achieved. This was a bold deviation from traditional Sith orthodoxy, but truly believed that his work was approaching a breakthrough, a triumph so final that it would render the old need for betrayal obsolete. Why cling to a system designed to preserve knowledge across generations, if generations themselves became irrelevant? Their partnership was not limited to philosophy or lab work. It extended into the halls of power. Plagueis, operating publicly under the name Higo Damaska, powerful figure within the intergalactic banking clan, engineered Palpatine's political rise with meticulous care. In 52, Palpatine was elected Senator of Naboo and the entire Charmel sector, a position that placed him directly inside the heart of the Republic the Sith sought to corrupt and destroy. Consider the ambition of their plan. While most beings fretted over careers and reputation, these two were executing a strategy that spanned decades, patiently moving pieces across the galactic board with the calm of master strategists. Plagueis pulled strings behind the curtain, banking interests, political bribes, trade alliances. Sidious wore a flawless public mask, a humble, honest servant of the people. Even after Palpatine's election, Plagueis continued mentoring him, sharpening his political cunning, refining his instincts, and preparing him for the climb to Supreme Chancellor. During this period, their relationship stood in stark contrast to what Sidious would later practice. Plagueis treated Sidious as a partner. He shared his vision. He gave access to all, but Sidious would not pass on this generosity. Where Plagueis shared knowledge freely, Sidious would hoard and compartmentalize it. Where Plagueis dreamed of a dual reign, Sidious would insist on absolute dominance. These subtle differences reveal something fundamental about how each viewed the Sith legacy. For Plagueis, power was a means to greater discovery. For Sidious, power was the goal. This divergence would have consequences. As Sidious embedded himself deeper in the Senate, he began to fully comprehend what political power could achieve, especially when married to the dark side. The lessons Plagueis had taught him about patience and manipulation blossomed in the corrupt heart of the Republic. senators, diplomats, even Jedi, they all began to fall under the sway of the charming politician from Naboo. None suspected that Sith lurking beneath the surface. Plagueis' training wasn't limited to politics or the Force. He also introduced Sidious to the ancient lore of the Sith, knowledge preserved in holocrons and texts recovered from ruins and temples. Through this, Sidious gained an understanding few others possessed, that the battle between light and dark was not merely galactic. It was civilization. Their collaboration reached its peak when Plagueis revealed his most audacious experiment. He believed he was on the verge of influencing midi-chlorians to create life, a being of power unlike any before. What Plagueis did not know was how this revelation would factor into Sidious's calculations. Over their years together, Plagueis had watched Sidious grow with the pride of a master. But he failed to see the truth. Sidious had internalized the Sith teachings too well. The apprentice was not waiting for some distant moment to strike. He was watching for the optimal moment, and the more power Plagueis revealed, the more urgently Sidious desired it. The very success of their bond planted the seeds of its destruction, a tragic paradox written in the language of Sith philosophy. For all its brilliance, the rule of two is built on betrayal. The apprentice must one day surpass the master, but the master trains them knowing full well that the blade will turn one day. What made Plagueis vulnerable was not a lack of foresight, it was an excess of hope. He truly believed they could break the cycle he dreamed of ruling together. Sidious dreamed of ruling alone, and as Palpatine rose higher, making connections across the galaxy, gaining influence and allies, the power dynamic began to shift. The student was becoming the master. Had Plagueis not been so consumed by the pursuit of immortality, he might have seen it. He might have recognized the quiet calculations forming in Sidious's mind, but he didn't. Their political power and scientific breakthroughs fed one another. Their vision accelerated, but beneath the surface, ambition swelled like a wave inevitable. Rising, Sidious was watching, measuring, calculating, waiting, and the end would come not from a Jedi blade or a failed experiment, but from the same room where so many secrets had been whispered. The story of Plagueis and Sidious reminds us, even among the Sithis, even among the Sithir, gravest threats are not distant. They are close. They sit beside us. They learn from us, and they wait to truly understand the bond between Plagueis and Sidious. We must step back and look at the philosophy that governed the Sith for over 1,000 years. The rule of two was never just a tradition or a convenient system. It was a foundational law, etched into the bones of the Sith Order after their near extinction, around 1000 BBY, in the ruins left behind by the devastating Jedi-Sith War. The Sith Order was shattered, its numbers decimated, its power fragmented, and its future uncertain. From this ash and ruin rose a visionary, Darth Bane. He saw in the Sith's destruction not merely defeat, but clarity. For Bane, the greatest threat to the Sith had never truly been the Jedi, but the Sith themselves. The old empire of the Sith had collapsed under the weight of its own chaos, rife with betrayal, backstabbing, and endless struggles for dominance. Weaklings allied against their betters. Apprentices struck too early, and masters clung too tightly to power. The dark side, in its rawest form, fostered this self-consuming storm. So Bane made a radical choice. He destroyed the remaining Sith Lords and declared a new law. From that moment forward, only two Sith could exist at any time: a master to embody power, and an apprentice to crave it. This wasn't just a tactic to evade Jedi detection. It was a complete philosophical transformation, a bold answer to the very nature of the dark side itself. The dark side thrives on emotion, on hunger, on ambition, and when left unchecked among many, it devours its own. But when shaped into a crucible of blade and the whetstone, the power of the Sith could be forged into something indomitable. In this crafting, Bane was inspired by something older, the Force dyad, a phenomenon whispered of in ancient tomes, a connection between two Force-sensitive beings so profound, so complete, that they became one in the Force, even as they remained two in body. The rule of two wasn't the same as this sacred bond, but it echoed its structure. Two as one to lead, one to learn, a cycle of death and rebirth through power. The Master's duty was to grow in power, to learn, to build a legacy of strength, and when the time came, pass it on. The apprentice's role was simpler: absorb everything, wait, then destroy the Master and take their place. Through this harsh system, the Sith ensured that only those who could overcome their masters, who could rise from blood and fire, would survive. Imagine what this demanded in practice. Unlike the Jedi, who nurtured and guided their students, Sith masters were forced to walk a razor's edge, teaching their apprentices enough to ensure the Sith line endured, but never enough to hand them the dagger. And the apprentices, in turn, learned with open eyes and hidden blades, studying their masters not just for wisdom, but for weakness. This bond was built on suspicion, on inevitability. Masters and apprentices might work together for years, even decades. They might develop something like respect, even admiration, but they always knew how the story would end. It had to end in betrayal. That was the price of progress. This was the brilliance and the doom of Bane's design. It didn't suppress the self-destructive hunger of the Sith. It weaponized it, turned it into a method of evolution. Grow stronger or die. Every master knew, grow complacent and you'll be replaced. Every apprentice knew, strike too soon and you'll be destroyed. The rule of two was a living blade, always sharpening. Itself, this philosophy shaped everything, not just in duels, but in politics, in cunning, in dark science. Each generation of Sith was expected not only to preserve what came before, but to surpass it. Strategy, deception, force mastery, innovation. Knowledge passed from hand to hand, like a lit torch carried through shadowed centuries, and secrecy above all was their shield. With only two Siths alive at a time, the Order could vanish into myth. From the shadows, they could corrupt and dismantle the Republic piece by piece. The Jedi, blind to what endured beneath their feet, believed the Sith had been extinct since the war's end. They were wrong by the time the torch passed to Darth Plagueis. The rule of two had borne fruit beyond even Bane's wildest vision. The Sith had not only survived, they had thrived. Quietly, in the shadows, they had become architects of the galaxy's future. And now, the moment was coming when everything would change. But even the most perfect system contains the seeds of its own undoing. As the Sith became stronger, generation by generation, their ambitions began to grow beyond even Bane's scope. Plagueis, with his obsession for unlocking immortality not through faith or ritual, but through the cold lens of science, began to wonder, what if the rule of two was no longer necessary? What if death itself could be defeated? If two Sith could live forever learning, growing, ruling side by side, then what need was there for succession through murder? What good was a rule built on loss, if loss could be erased? These questions, crept deeper into Plagueis' mind as he trained his apprentice Sidious, as he revealed the mysteries of midi-chlorians, of life's very roots. He began to dream of something greater. But here is where his vision and Sidious's ambition began to fracture. For Sidious had learned the rule of two too well. To him, it wasn't merely a method, it was gospel. It was the very engine of Sith survival. He saw in Plagueis' questioning a fatal flaw: stagnation. And stagnation was death. This tension, this quiet dissonance between the master who dreamed of ending the cycle and the apprentice who saw that cycle as sacred, would shape everything that followed. Together, Plagueis and Sidious worked toward shared goals, but beneath their unity was a quiet war of ideas, a conflict neither fully saw until the end came. Their story is the rule of two, refined and sharpened. Two Sith, both brilliant, both ruthless, both seeking control over life and death, and both, inevitably, on a path where partnership could not last. As we walk further into the tale of Darth Plagueis, remember this central truth of the Sith: even the closest bond is built on betrayal. Even the greatest alliance will end with a blade in the dark. And so, while the rule of two had carried the Sith through centuries of survival and evolution, Darth Plagueis came to see it not as an end, but a beginning, a stepping stone toward something infinitely more powerful. In his search through ancient Force knowledge tomes, whispered of in forbidden tongues, Plagueis unearthed something older, rarer, and more profound: the doctrine of the dyad. This was no mere philosophical relic, it was a revelation, a buried truth, one that may have inspired Bane's rule itself. The Force dyad was a phenomenon unlike any other, a bond between two Force sensitives, so absolute, so complete, that they became one in the Force. A singular will, a shared power, two minds, two bodies, but one presence. Unlike the rule of two, which was a system imposed by design, the dyad could not be forged by ritual or will. It was natural, it was rare, it was the will of the Force itself. The text spoke of its strength, as strong as life itself. For Plagueis, Sith, who had already come closer than any before him to mastering life and defying death, was an irresistible thread. If such a connection could be created, could it transcend mortality itself? To Plagueis, it was obvious. In biology, two strands combined to create new life. What if the same could occur in the Force? Could two Force signatures merge to become something greater, something eternal? And so he turned his gaze to Sidious, his apprentice, his equal, perhaps. And he made the boldest choice of his life. He would attempt to forge a Force dyad with him. It was audacious, intimate, dangerous, where other Sith kept their apprentices at a distance, always wary. Always armed, Plagueis sought a bond deeper than any master had dared to create. It spoke to his confidence, but also to a kind of blindness. The rituals he attempted are lost to time. We only know they happened, described later by Sidious himself in the Secrets of the Sith. But the results were clear. The effort failed, utterly. And in Sidious's cold voice, we find the verdict: though he was wise in the ways of the Force, he proved unworthy of the task. Contempt, not just for the failure, but for the weakness. Perhaps Sidious resisted. Perhaps he feared what such a bond would give Plagueis: too much influence, too much power. But the failure was pivotal. For Plagueis, it was a rare defeat, proof that some corners of the Force would not yield to science. Not yet. For Sidious, it was something else, a confirmation that his master, for all his knowledge, was not infallible, not eternal, not invincible. Sidious began to see the rule of two, not as a flawed system nor as a pale imitation of the dyad, but as something necessary, a mechanism for control, a path to power. Where Plagueis sought connection, Sidious would seek dominion. Where Plagueis shared, Sidious would hoard. And so, the dyad, what Plagueis had hoped would be the ultimate evolution of Sith power, became just another fracture, another dream broken on the edge of the dark. Generations later, a true Force dyad would finally emerge between Rey and Ben Solo, a bond not forged in laboratories, nor summoned by ambition, but chosen by the will of the Force. The lesson is this: what Plagueis tried to command, the Force gave freely. What he sought to control, only love and balance could awaken, and dark elements, to manifest something the purely dark side approach of the Sith could never achieve. The distinction between the rule of two and the doctrine of the dyad reveals something essential, something painful about the limitations of Sith philosophy. The Sith had always sought to bend the Force to their will, to dominate rather than commune, to twist and command rather than listen and surrender. Yet the most powerful phenomena in the Force, like the dyad, do not emerge through control. They bloom through balance, through harmony, through connection, concepts fundamentally at odds with everything the Sith had built themselves upon. Plagueis, for all his scientific brilliance and mastery of the Force, could not recognize this. That was his blind spot, his flaw. He remained a creature of the Sith, worldview conditioned to believe that the galaxy, and even the Force itself, could be bent under enough pressure. He could not accept that some parts of existence must be allowed to unfold naturally, that surrender not control was sometimes the path to the deepest truths. This failure may have planted the earliest seeds of doubt in Plagueis' mind, doubts about the ultimate viability of the Sith path as it had been practiced for over 1,000 years. If the dyad represented a power greater than anything the rule of two could offer, and yet remained forever beyond his grasp, despite all his effort, what then did that suggest about the very foundations of Sith philosophy? These questions would not have escaped the mind of someone like Plagueis. He likely turned away from them not because they were wrong, but because they were unanswerable. Instead, he doubled down, poured himself even more feverishly into his experiments, into midi-chlorian manipulation. If he could not forge a metaphysical bond that defied death, then he would build one in the laboratory. He would synthesize it. Meanwhile, Sidious watched. Quietly, patiently, he saw his master's frustrations, saw his failures, and he remembered them, filed them away. For Sidious, each experiment, whether it succeeded or failed, was a tool, knowledge to be weaponized. Unlike Plagueis, Sidious did not allow failed experiments to shake his faith. He used them, refined them, sharpened them into blades for later. The collapse of the dyad attempt changed everything between them, perhaps not with words, but in silence. Plagueis, maybe sensing his apprentice's rising ambitions, began emphasizing their shared future more forcefully, the promise of ruling together, the illusion of unity. Sidious, in turn, wore the perfect mask, the loyal apprentice, the humble student. But behind the mask, he was calculating, preparing. This was the core irony of their bond. The more Plagueis tried to transcend the traditional Sith limitations, the more rigidly Sidious embraced them. The master looked forward to a new age, beyond the rule of two, but the apprentice was perfecting the rule of two to a knife's edge. Neither truly saw the other. Not until it was far too late. The search for the dyad had failed. But in failing, it had revealed everything. It had shown how far Plagueis was willing to go, how open his mind had become, how fragile his hope, and it had shown Sidious something far more useful, what couldn't be achieved by will alone. The dyad was powerful, yes, but inaccessible, uncontrollable, not practical, not useful, not Sith. As their work continued, the dyad would remain unspoken, unacknowledged, a silent fracture in the foundation of their partnership. Plagueis returned to the sciences. Sidious filed the concept away for future exploitation. Master and apprentice moved forward, but in opposite directions. And the day came, as it always must, when the apprentice no longer saw the need for a master. Their partnership had been fruitful, more fruitful than most in Sith history. Together they had advanced knowledge in manipulation, laid the groundwork for galactic upheaval, and embedded themselves deep within the Republic's machinery. Sidious rose in the Senate. Plagueis thrived in the shadows, using the financial levers of the galaxy to push their quiet agenda forward. But the rule of two has no end but one. The apprentice must surpass the master. That is not a suggestion. It is the engine of the Sith Order, its cruel genius. For all his brilliance, for all his ambition, Plagueis failed to grasp the most basic truth of the Sith. Apprentices are meant to kill their masters. That is their purpose. And so, as Sidious grew stronger, something shifted. He had learned what he needed: the mysteries of midi-chlorians, the secrets of Sith alchemy, the strategies of manipulation and long-term planning. He had taken everything of value his master had to give, and in what remained he saw weakness. Where Plagueis sought discovery, Sidious sought power. Where Plagueis dreamed of shared immortality, Sidious dreamed of a galaxy ruled by one, himself. The philosophical gap between them had grown unbridgeable. Plagueis, so focused on life and death, had become a distraction, a vulnerability, a relic, and so the decision was made, clean, clinical, sift, in accordance with the rule of two taught to him by Plagueis himself, struck. He didn't do it in combat. There was no lightsaber duel, no grand confrontation, no war of the Force, no farewell. He simply broke into his master's private quarters and killed him in his sleep. This moment, the quiet murder of one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history, was done without pageantry, without drama, without honor, and that, more than anything, reveals the heart of Darth Sidious. He did not need a battle to feel validated. He didn't want it. Efficiency was all that mattered. The master had outlived his usefulness. The master had to die. Some accounts speak of Force lightning. Others suggest a more subtle method. It doesn't matter. The result is the same. Plagueis was gone, erased. His legacy swallowed whole by the apprentice he had once believed he might rule beside. The irony is unbearable. Plagueis, who spent his life unlocking the mystery of death, was murdered in the most ordinary way. In his sleep, all his brilliance, all his experiments, all his dreams of eternal life, undone in a moment. Sidious later said that Plagueis simply didn't act quickly enough, that the old master failed to anticipate, failed to respond, failed to be Sith when it mattered most. Maybe it was his trust in Sidious that doomed him. Maybe it was his obsession with science that dulled his senses. Or maybe he just couldn't believe his vision had been rejected, not by the Jedi, not by the galaxy, but by the one person he had chosen to carry it forward. In the end, Sidious did more than kill his master. He rewrote the future of the Sith. The idea of two Sith ruling side by side, gone, replaced by Sidious, cold, hierarchical vision. He would be the master, eternal, untouchable. All others would be tools, apprentices used and discarded. The lessons of Plagueis' death shaped Sidious for the rest of his life. He never again trusted, never again shared freely, never allowed a bond strong enough to become a risk. This is why he treated Vader not as a partner, but as a servant. Why he withheld knowledge. Why he ensured that his apprentices were always weaker, always dependent. Because he knew what could happen if they weren't. He had done it himself. And yet, for all that, some still wonder, did Plagueis really die that night? Could a being who had come so close to mastering life have found a way to preserve his consciousness? Could he be out there still, hidden, waiting? There's no evidence, but the question lingers. Still, the more likely truth is simpler, that Plagueis died, that he failed, that in the end, death claimed him as it claims us all. The very thing he spent his life trying to defeat claimed him in the end, and yet, in another sense, he did not vanish. His legacy endured through Sidious, through Vader, through the Clone Wars, through the Empire, through the tragedy of Anakin Skywalker and the birth of Darth Vader, through every shadow cast by the Sith. Plagueis left fingerprints on everything. Even in the final clash between Rey and a resurrected Sidious, the echoes of Plagueis lingered. His knowledge, his science, his vision. But maybe the real question isn't how he died. Maybe it's this. In his relentless pursuit of eternal life, did Darth Plagueis ever truly live?